Welcome to App Stories, a weekly exploration of the world of apps. Today's show is brought to you by Zapier and the Best Photo app. I'm John Voorhees, and with me is my co-host, Federico Vitici. Hi, Federico.
Hey, John, how are you?
I'm doing really well. We have another special guest today, Adriaan de Jongh, the developer of the iOS game Hidden Folks. This past February, I went to a kickoff party for the Train Jam, which is a hackathon for game developers who are on their way to the Game Developers Conference in San Francisco. The unique thing about the Train Jam is that it starts in Chicago and it takes place on a train, which is a 52-hour ride between Chicago and San Francisco. Adriaan was at the event just a week after having launched Hidden Folks to universally great reviews. He and I got to chatting about gaming on iOS and the process of creating games like Hidden Folks and a lot more. I knew right away when we were speaking that I wanted to have him on App Stories to share his stories and how he put together Hidden Folks.
Yeah, and for those who don't know, Hidden Folks is an interactive search game that features 14 hand-drawn black and white little worlds where you're supposed to find either an object or usually a character hiding in this beautiful hand-drawn world. And it's been compared to, like modern Where's Waldo. But really what sets Hidden Folks apart is the collaboration between Adriaan and the artist Sylvain Tegrug, who drew these beautiful little words and little stories in Hidden Folks. And also, the thing that sets it apart from like a traditional hidden object book is that because it's on iOS and it uses multi-touch, you can actually swipe across these worlds, you can zoom, you can pan, and you can tap to interact with the world. So whether it's about cutting a bush to find someone hiding behind it or making a monkey fall from a tree, there's a certain level of interactivity in Hidden Folks that truly makes it special. And combined with the graphic style and combined with the excellent sound effects that we're going to talk about with Adriaan, it is truly a different experience on iOS. Just to give you some context, there are over 120 hidden items in these drawings. There are over 200 unique interactions that you can perform in the game. And so Hidden Folks came out on iOS first on the iPhone and iPad, but now it's also on PC. It is the top-rated game on Steam, where it's available for both macOS and Windows. And I thought if this would be a great opportunity to talk to Adriaan and ask him about this unique process of blending illustrations, blending this sort of old form of artistic creation, which is hand-drawing characters and little words, and making them a video game for multi-touch. It's quite, the old world and the new one blending in this sort of video game experience unlike any other. So welcome to the show, Adriaan.
Glad to be here.
So I wanted to ask you, where did the idea for Hidden Folks come from? How did you come up with a game?
So the first time I met Sylvain is, I guess now 2.5 years ago, when I accidentally stumbled upon his graduation exposition at the Rietveld Academy in Amsterdam. And I was really intrigued by actually the background of his work, because I think the foreground of his work were these glass globes, and those were nice, but in the background he had these little miniature worlds, these drawings. And I saw those and I was like, oh, that's amazing. And I kept looking at those and not really at the things that were at the foreground. And at some point he walked up to me and he was like, yeah, what do you think? I'm like, these drawings are amazing. And then I sort of jokingly told him, man, we should make a game together. And we then exchanged business cards. And I guess afterwards we looked up each other and started thinking about oh, maybe I should take this more seriously. And I came up with this super quick prototype, and I stole some art from his website, and then I sort of put it together in a very hacky, dirty, quick, and super quick way. And then I told him, I emailed him saying, hey, I have an idea for a game. Do you maybe want to hang out and meet up with me, talk about that? And yeah, we hung out, and that's sort of where the idea, almost there, was immediately born. Let's make some sort of hide and seek game to really make that feeling that your drawings had to me, that feeling of, wow, what's happening? There's so many little stories. How can we make that most alive? And he could do that through drawing his thing, and I could do that through adding interactivity to the concept. So that's sort of how it was born, the idea. And then we spent 2.5 years figuring out what the hell we were doing.
That's the best development approach. So a lot of the reviews that have come out about the game, they mention how it's like a modern version of Where's Waldo and those type of hidden object books. But maybe that only captures, I feel, like only one dimension of the game, because as you mentioned, there's the interactivity, there's the tapping around to discover all these little stories, all these little setups. How would you describe what Hidden Folks is all about?
Well, I would agree with you that saying that it's like Where's Waldo would be a very one-dimensional thing, or whether Hidden Folks has a little bit more depth. But yeah, I think what we really tried to stay true to was this feeling of exploration and really trying to make all those little stories very alive. And that's something that's very hard to describe in words, actually. People, you can say it to people, but unless they've seen and played the game, it's very hard. And so that's why even when we talk about the game, we first start off saying, hey, it's a little bit like Where's Waldo, and people immediately be like, oh yeah, that's the book in which like a gazillion things are unfolding, right? But then we also add, yeah, but like there's stuff you can tap and you can open and drag, and there's people inside things or behind things or below things, and that of course adds another dimension to the game, adds more depth in that there's more stories that also unfold as you interact with the game. So that's sort of my view on that.
Thanks to Zapier for supporting App Stories. Zapier is easy automation for busy people. Think of Zapier as the glue that ties your web apps together, moving information between them automatically so you can focus on more important tasks. That's exactly how we use it here at Mac Stories. We're a small team with a lot of things going on. Zapier allows us to focus on creating content for the site, club, and podcast without getting bogged down in busy work. A good example is Mac Stories Weekly, the newsletter that we send out to club members every week. The only way we could produce it with 3 people is with Zapier's help. For instance, every time a reader sends a request for a workflow or a question, they fill out a Google form. Zapier takes the information from the form, reformats it, and creates a Trello card on a board where we plan each week's issue. It saves us the time of moving the information off of Google's platform and onto Trello's, while simultaneously ensuring consistent formatting of questions we receive. We also use Zapier to tie MailChimp to Twitter. Zapier fires off a tweet announcing the new issue. Zapier connects over 700 apps, including over 17 of its own, for doing things like parsing text from emails, running workflows on a schedule, formatting and translating text, and much more. Zapier also supports detailed workflows with multiple steps and filters, so they'll only run on the data you need them to use. You might even say that Zapier makes you happier. It certainly does for us. Visit zapier.com/appstories for a 2-week free trial and to let them know that you heard about them on the podcast. Plans start at just $20 per month. Thanks again to Zapier for supporting the show. Adriaan, it's John. When I look at Hidden Folks, it just seems to me like it was absolutely made for touch, and it looks great on an iPad. I was wondering how you approach translating that onto the desktop and also the Apple TV for that matter.
Yeah, so actually it's a little bit strange because I guess most developers don't work this way, but mobile was always very safe for me. Like I've made a lot of mobile games before, and I sort of know how it works. And so I wanted with Hidden Folks to sort of expand beyond mobile and just sort of touch the water here and there. And Apple TV was one of those. Like, it's sort of a little step up to a console, if you think about it, because the environment's just completely different. The controller is very different. So that was sort of like experimenting how that would work. And the same goes for Steam. I did not really take it that seriously, but surprise, surprise, it did really well on PC as well. So yeah, it was more like an experimental thing initially. And so translating the touch controls to mouse was actually pretty straightforward. I think, yeah, that took me maybe a week or two to really get right. And honestly, by now, I think it plays equally well on PC as it does on touch, except for the scrolling, which, the scrolling and zooming is always a little bit of a weird thing on multi-platform games. Yeah, but I think the translation went pretty well.
So you're working from a common code base for the games that you just have to port over to the other platforms, or how did you do that sort of thing?
Yeah, so we use Unity, the game engine, with which it becomes slightly easier to do multi-platform. But from the start, I already made all my code work with both touch and mouse. And what we did for Apple TV and what I could do for future consoles is have a cursor in the middle of the screen and you move the camera around. And so when you tap it or when you click or press a button on the controller, it actually, sort of like fakes the touch in the middle of the screen. That's sort of how I deal with all these different types of controls. And then there's, of course, the Unity UI, the user interface that takes care of a lot of the, sort of like a lot of multi-platform controls when it comes to UI. So Unity's very helpful in that sense.
Yeah, it sounds like it. You know what? I really love how you did all the sound effects yourselves with mouth sounds. It reminded me a lot of a game that I played that came out quite a while ago by Lauren Brichter called Letterpress, which is a word game. He did the same sort of thing on a much smaller scale. And I was, there's something about it that seems to really humanize the game. I was wondering if you could tell me a little bit about how you decided to take that approach and what the process was like putting together the audio.
Yeah, so it's been a little bit weird. So it was around the time that we came up with Hidden Folks that I was also doing various game jams, and there was one group of people with whom I did a game jam and we were like, with the four of us, this was during the global game jam, and with the four of us we were making a game. What was this game? It was like a game with sheep or something, and in a game jam, you don't have much time, and we were like basically four programmers, and so none of us was really a sound designer at all. And so I was like, yeah, sure, I'll, give me a microphone, I'll make some sounds for this game. And I spent like a day doing meh, 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 and it was really funny. But obviously, we did not really take it seriously at all. And so at the end of the Global Game Jam, in the Netherlands at least, there's always a sort of like prize-winning thing, a contest happening. And honestly, the audio guy came by and I was like, nah, you don't have to stop here, you don't have to listen to. I did not take it seriously. And he actually like moved on to the next game. And then at the very end, he said he had some time left and still wanted to try. And he laughed so hard. And we actually won the Global Game Jam for best audio. Like, I felt so awkward about that. There were like maybe 50 audio designers in the room, and I am, being this idiot screaming in a microphone, winning the audio award. So that sort of got me thinking like, oh, maybe there's something behind this. And it was also around that time that I was making a lot of sort of strange videos with my girlfriend, that she would record inanimate objects like a tree or like a candle or something, and then she would like have these very quick movements with the camera as if they were sort of conversing, and then I would add weird voices on top of them. And it would be the funniest thing. So this was all during the time that Hidden Folks was starting to become a thing, and it was when I needed sound at some point, I figured then like, oh, what if we just put this in here? I guess also initially we thought, oh, maybe this is just for fun or temporary, but then we put it in there and it clicked so well that we decided to just keep it in, not just for economical reasons, but also because it was charming as hell, and it was really easy to make. And it turns out the voice is a really easy thing to put in the game and to manipulate and to change. And like, if you want me to scream in a microphone for an hour in very different ways for different kinds of objects, that's easily done. And we didn't need any post-processing on any of the sounds. The only thing we did do is ask a cool sound designer called Martin Kvale to do some of the mixing for the game so that the volume sort of makes sense. And that's actually still something that we wanted an audio designer to help us with. But yeah, that's sort of how it came to be and what it turned out to be.
That's quite a story. How did you go about designing Hidden Folks, the worlds, and the scope of them, and what you're going to make interactive, and how you're going to hide things and give people hints as to where to find things, that sort of thing?
Yeah, that's a lot of questions. You're basically asking like, how did we make the game? Well, I guess this is the part that took us 2.5 years, where I guess I should say it maybe took us 1.5 years to sort of discover like, where do we start and how do we end up with an area that people can play that's actually fun and that makes sense for people. And it took a lot of experimentation. It took a lot of trying to figure out like within the theme what worked, what made sense, and how the hints could point at smaller or bigger areas, what interactions we should have, and how those interactions came with certain expectations. Oh man, there's just so much for this. But like very, very specifically, if you would ask us right now to make an area, Sylvain would start drawing in a certain theme. We would like pick a theme at random, and we would both brainstorm about interactions, and we would prototype those interactions. We would then slowly start putting together this area and basically grow it organically. So we put some statics objects in there, and then we fill it with interactions, and then we dress it up. We call it the dress up phase, where that's actually the part where that takes most of the time, especially for Sylvain. So we start with a general structure, then we put the interactions there, then we do dress up, and then we do a lot of playtesting, and then we change a lot of the environment again, because usually it turns out that certain areas are too hard or not distinguishable enough. And then we start looking into adding targets, and then we start writing the hints. And then I have a friend who actually comes over to me for an evening, and then we spend a whole evening trying to come up with funny stuff. I am not funny, so that's a really big problem. So that's why I have him to come up with these super dry humor jokes. And then we do more playtesting, figure out whether the jokes work, and also that the hints convey the information that's required. Yeah, and that's sort of how the process goes right now. We feel pretty confident about it now, even though it's still always a little bit of a black box until we actually see people play it. So that's why we center the playtests in our design process.
What would you say is the most common piece of feedback that you've received for the game so far?
Ooh, that's hard. I don't know, actually. I think it's not something people say, I think. It's something people do. A lot of people get lost. At some point, a lot of people really try to sort of push themselves through the game. It's like they want to... that you really want to find something, and then they spend like 3 hours in the game. Especially with like the bigger areas, like it's good and also nice to just step away from it for a little bit. So one thing I see a lot is that people get stuck somewhere and then keep focusing on like this one thing that they cannot find and be a little bit frustrated by that. But yeah, I guess what we really try to do is steer people away from that by allowing them to go to the next area. And most people eventually do that. Yeah.
Have you looked, for example, at numbers that say X amount of people have seen the quote-unquote ending of the game, the final part of the game?
Yeah, so that's how many people actually fully finished it, is 15%, 15.
Do you think that maybe there's something that you could do to kind of help people along the way? And I'm thinking of games like, for example, I think Nintendo on the 3DS, when they did Mario Land, they had a new system that if the player kept losing, the level would become easier over time to kind of help the player advance. Is that something that you've maybe considered when someone gets lost, to kind of adjust the game so it gets easier to find the characters that they're looking for?
So I could, but I probably won't. I think people we could speculate over what. So first of all, I think it's fair to say that 15% is not a bad number. It's actually rather high. And, I know for a fact that the 15% really, really like the game in that they reach out to me as well. I get daily emails of people saying how much they loved it and can't wait for more. But regarding all the people that can figure it out, I think it's not, so first of all, it's not always that it's too difficult or that people that get lost. Sometimes there's an interaction that they just don't understand, and that's why they cannot proceed to the next area. Sometimes it's just this one character that they just miss, and it's not really their fault. They have everything right. Like, they get the hint, they see where they have to tap, but they tap like maybe an inch left of it, so that they don't get to play the animation or don't open the right thing. And those kinds of frustrations are very hard to deal with, and I could give people another hint, but that wouldn't necessarily solve that problem. So yeah, I think and especially with a game that's all about like these tiny little worlds, that pressing these right tiny little things, making a small error can often lead to a big impact, basically.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know. I don't think I'll implement, like, the only way I could think about if you would implement such a system would be to write another set of hints. But, that would also be a huge amount of work.
Yeah. I remember playing your previous games, and especially Fingal was a huge hit. Back in the first iPad days, I think. I remember playing a multiplayer, and it was so awkward and so funny at the same time. Do you, and of course also Boundon, I didn't play that as much, but it was also so original and so different. Do you think there's any lesson that you've carried over from those experiences and sort of brought them into Hidden Folks, or are those games just so different that making Hidden Folks was so new, it wasn't not relatable in any way?
So for me, every game that I make has a different vision. It has a different sort of feeling and a different thing I want to achieve, a different experience. And so for me, every project from a design perspective is a new project from which I have to start from scratch. And that was the case for both Fingal and Boundon. That was also the case for Hidden Folks. And so for a large part, the design is very different, and I couldn't really carry over any of the lessons I learned from that. But in terms of design process, I think what Boundon really taught me is that if you do your playtesting wrong, or you don't focus on the right sort of feedback, that can really harm your game in the long run. We actually talked about what big is the percentage of people that finish Hidden Folks at 15%. For Boundon, it's 1%. That's pretty bad. That's like really bad. And so that really struck me as a big flaw in my process, and that's something I really changed after that. And then, of course, there's also the business and marketing part, where we're talking about Fingal, Boundon, and Hidden Folks, which are basically the most successful games I've designed, but I've designed more games. Hidden Folks is my 7th game, and all those other titles have also learned me that if you don't have a game that can stand out, that has a sort of hook, a spark, something that if you show it to people or explain it to people that they'll immediately understand, you're going to have a very hard time selling the game as well, and also doing business for it and the marketing and the PR and etc. So yeah, I mean, there's of course all these little things in between, and the sort of process of making games that you carry over from one project to another. But as this was also like my first first PC game, and also my first Apple TV game, it really felt like a new project to me, and it really felt like I had to start over again. And so I feel super lucky that it has done as well as it did.
Thanks to the Best Photo app for sponsoring App Stories. We take and manage more photos than ever before with our iPhones and iPads, which requires a new type of app to sift through the avalanche of images. Otherwise, when you want to share a photo, you're left repeating the internal debate between multiple versions of the same picture. The Best Photo app helps you quickly choose the best photos once and delete the rest. With an in-app purchase, you can add the best features too, including a compare mode with synchronized zooming and a collection of smart search tools to focus on common problem areas in your photo library. Learn more at thebestphotoapp.com. Thanks again to the Best Photo app for sponsoring App Stories. What's next for Hidden Folks? I know you're working on new levels, but new worlds. What else is next?
New areas are pretty much done right now. I need to go through a lot of feedback that I've been gathering from beta tests over the last couple of days. After that will be released. So right now I'm thinking whether I should say this right now. Yeah, you know what? I'll just do it. So I'm working on a feature for Hidden Folks that is basically Hidden Folks multiplayer, which means that you can hide targets and give them a name and give them a description and then send them over to someone else who can then just click a link basically, and that will open up the game, and that will open up all the targets that someone else hit for you. So that's what I'm working on next. It's actually a pretty big feature, and it's technically hard to do. And so I've been working on that for a while, but it will still need a lot of beta testing and testing before I can release that. So that's one thing. Another thing is Android is coming. So there's every time someone releases an iOS game, and I guess every iOS developer could say that this is true, but yeah, Android people are very vocal about wanting the game on their platform, and more than iOS users. So that's a thing that's happening. It is really happening. Also doing a release in China for Android, which is going to be cool, using a publisher probably. And then maybe more platforms and definitely more areas. So it's actually hard for me to stop Sylvain from making levels because I can't keep up with him. Like, he can draw and put together these areas way quicker than I can code them and come up with the interactions and do the design and do the hints and do the business and marketing and all that stuff. So I think he's already brainstorming some new areas. I think we want to work on a beach next, something like that. Yeah. Yeah. And it's also not the only thing that I'm working on. For the next month and a half, I'll also be working on a serious game or an applied game, however you want to call it. A game for people with brain injury to help them sort of deal with hypersensitivity. So that's a completely different kind of project that I'm also, trying to make it happen.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it's a little bit too much on my plate right now, and I'm trying to offload as much as I can. But yeah, nobody else can program Hidden Folks, so I'll have to do that, I guess.
Yeah. Wow. So, Adriaan, where do you see mobile gaming going in the future, especially on iOS?
Oh, very tough question. It's really hard to say. I think it really depends on what the platforms are how they're going to present it and what their focus is going to be. For instance, I think that Google Play is currently, they're really all over the place with what they want their store to be. They still don't really have a really good store front page. And so, yeah, they could go anywhere, honestly. It really depends on what they're going to be making next, how they're going to improve on their store. As for iOS, I think they've always had a pretty good curation team that really loves the slick-looking, high-quality, now these days also a lot of indie games, but still like the money makers. So they're really looking for high-quality stuff. And so I think it's going to be harder for indie game developers. It's going to be harder for smaller teams to compete, and they'll have to be doing bigger and bigger investments. And so, I think that's sort of where most of the mobile market will go. Bigger quality, bigger titles, higher quality, more unique, more crazy, more extremes. We're gonna find all the extremes. That's what I think that will happen. But again, I'm not sure. It will really depend on what the platforms will do with their storefronts.
Adriaan, thanks for coming on the show. Where can people find you on the internet?
So I'm on Twitter, Adriaan de Jongh. I'm also, if you look up hiddenfolks.com, you can find the game there. You'll find me through the game. Yeah, that should be it. My website, adriaandejongh.nl. If you want to see some of my previous work, yeah, that should be it.
Thank you.
Cool, thanks. Thanks for the interview, guys.
Thanks a lot, Adriaan. Well, that's it for this week, folks. Thanks again to our sponsors, Zapier and the Best Photo app. If you're enjoying the show, please tell a friend about it. We'd really appreciate it. You can find Federico and I writing on MacStories.net and for Club Mac Stories. Federico is at Vitici on Twitter. That's VITICCI. And I'm at John Voorhees, JOHN VOORHEES. Talk to you next week, Federico.
Ciao, John.